Okay. Hello everyone and welcome to our webinar, Stuck in Reverse, how Illumina put their content quality program in drive and accelerated success. And now I'm going to introduce to you our presenters. So next slide please. We have Kathleen, who's the Director of Content Operations at Illumina, Elizabeth McCroskey, who's the Senior Instructional Designer at Illumina, Cinnamon Tillotson, who is the Staff Technical Writer at Illumina, and then also joining us are Val Swisher, who is CEO of Content Rules, and Greg Swisher, who's the CTO of Content Rules. So today Illumina has a great story to share with you. So Kathleen, the stage is all yours.
All right. Hello, everybody. So if you're like me, you might have learned about Acrolinks at a conference. And so you see this presentation and you realize, oh my gosh, this is going to be amazing. This will transform everything we do. And you come back all psyched, ready to propose it, ready to go and get this software for your company. I would say don't go with your first impulse. Again, if you're like me, the first slide you would probably create is something like this, where you say, here's why we should get it. Terminology, localization, rule sets, all this stuff. And as writers or trainers, we all understand exactly what this means. We know all the implications. The problem is that asking for Acrolinks is not like asking for a copy of FrameMaker or even like Flare. It's enterprise software. So what you're asking for is capital expenditure. You're asking for IT support and implementation. You're asking for a pretty serious investment from finance. And so you can't ask for it the same way. The people who approve this are generally at the VP level and often cross-functional committees that are in charge of handling enterprise software at your company. If they see this slide, first thing they're going to see is how does it relate to corporate goals? There's absolutely no sense of how it supports anything the company is doing. The fact that you're immediately talking about Acrolinks shows bias, and that doesn't go over well with the cross-functional committee who are responsible for ensuring that you've done your due diligence. And what's more, you're not talking about anything that your potential funders care about. You're not giving them the numbers to show how the capital expenditure will go, what the yearly operational expense is, or what the return on investment will be. Takeaway is, if you talk like a tech writer, you will not get corporate funding. Instead, think like an executive. Essentially, if you get down to it, executives have to care about two things: increase revenue, cut costs. So what things about Acrolinks would resonate with them? Well, here's some possible things that could speak to an executive level of concern. So if you're going into regulated markets, Acrolinks helps control your terminology. If you use the word best in a regulated environment when it's not backed up by a clinical trial, that can cause problems. We all know that localization is expensive, and Acrolinks can save money on localization. Saving money is a big deal. It can accelerate time to market, especially if you're at a company where you're trying to do simultaneous release in multiple languages. There, shortening the localization cycle accelerates time to market in all of your geographic markets. If you're doing, for example, a branding program, then Acrolinks does protect brand equity. It helps ensure that all of the things that are written for your company, that your company voice is one voice and not many voices. And on a related note, if you're doing a lot of mergers and acquisitions, what you're doing there is you're bringing on a lot of different companies that have their own writing styles. And without a tool like Acrolinks, you're relying on editors and written style guides and reminders to try and get people to speak with one voice. We all know how error-prone that is. So I would say choose your moment. Pay attention to those corporate goals and make your move at a time when Acrolinks is supporting things that are on the official company goals. The next thing to do, once you've chosen your moment, is figure out who are your sponsors and your stakeholders. The people we're used to dealing with are tech writers, trainers, our peers. But the problem is that our peers generally don't have decision-making power when it comes to things like enterprise applications. So you think about who does have decision-making power at the enterprise level, and what kind of power do they have? They're your potential supporters. These are people who could nix this project by saying, we think this is a bad idea. But on the plus side, they can influence the people who do have the power to make decisions by saying, yes, we agree that Accel is supporting our company goals and we really should get this. You want to get these people's support. So yes, you should be talking to the writers, the trainers, employee communications, and so on, and getting their enthusiasm, because that gives you support when you go and talk to your evaluators. But really focus on these people first. And then before you can really go a step further, you need someone who will promise to pay. This doesn't quite give you the ability to move ahead, but it's table stakes. If you haven't got a promise to pay, then you really can't do anything. The people who usually decide are some kind of governance committee. Sometimes this is one person, sometimes it is a cross-functional committee. And so you've gotten the enthusiasm of your end users. You've gotten, say, quality and regulatory to back you with your sponsors who've agreed to pay. And then you go to the cross-functional governance committee and say, I'm proposing that we introduce a tool to govern content quality. And they will look at all of this and decide whether or not you can go ahead. So most companies have processes for introducing enterprise software. You should talk to groups like IT and finance to find out what's the process at your company, because I guarantee you that they have walked other groups through this. They can give you things like templates, sometimes pretty extensive guidelines. When I went looking, I found that there was an entire internal website with guidance on how to do this. And when I went and talked to IT, they hooked me up with an entire team of people who would support me in getting the statement of work and doing finance negotiations, all the rest of it. I asked them to refer me to someone in R&D who had managed a lot of these projects. And I went and I interviewed that person and said, tell me about how to run a good project of this type. What are the key things I need to do and not do? And I got all kinds of good suggestions there. The other thing I did was I went and talked to finance and said, how are other people proposing this kind of thing? What kinds of proposals get approved? What can I do to show that I've really done my due diligence? By talking to all of these people, I got access to a lot of resources and a lot of advice, a lot of best practices. So I wasn't just wandering around in the dark trying to get someone to pay attention to me waving a sign saying, Accel rules. Instead, I was doing the formal process, and I got the automatic respect for the proposal that comes from using the process that everyone expects you to use. So what you're doing at this point when you're proposing Accel is you are in concept stage, or maybe pre-concept. You want to nail this. This is the point at which you might be the most involved. It's the point at which I was the most involved. Later on, when we got approval, I handed off the actual implementation to the linguistic team and the IT team, and I became less involved personally. So the concept stage has two main things. First, you need to get funding from your sponsor. That's the goal. And the key thing you are working up to doing is presenting a business case to get approval to go ahead with this project. To do that, you need to show that there is a business need. This is where you refer back to those corporate goals and say things like, our localization budget is approaching $1 million and we can save 20% of that in localization costs. We're adding on a whole lot of new companies. They're all coming in speaking like they used to. We need to get one voice. You need to really compare alternative solutions. So this is where you show that you are not biased towards one vendor. You need to find out who are the contenders, including the status quo and internal solutions like, well, what if the managers just pay more attention? Can we just have the editors check the quality? Can we ask the localization vendors to move a little faster? You know, show that you've done your homework and really compare different ways we can get to that business goal. When you're talking to your sponsor and the cross-functional committee, they're going to want to see that you've done your due diligence and that you've reached out to your stakeholders. So if you can come in and say, I've been talking to quality and regulatory, and they agree that this is a priority because they're concerned about things that we might accidentally say in an FDA submission that would get negative attention. If you can say, I've talked to our brand group, they're about to do a whole brand program, and they're very excited about Acrolinks as a tool to support what they're doing. Brand equity programs are pretty expensive, and so anything that will support that will immediately get some attention. And you should get initial cost estimates from your vendors, although I stress initial, okay? You should do an initial vendor evaluation. At this point, because you're just in concept, you should go broad but not deep. Looking back and knowing what I know now, I would say at this point I went too deep and I got really into the details of costs and ROI and all the rest of it, and really I just needed a loose cost estimate at this point that I could talk to, because actually what happened was that IT went and did the final cost negotiation and everything changed. So I didn't need to get quite as detailed as I did. But on the other hand, the fact that I did get detailed certainly showed people that I knew what I was talking about, so you have to balance that. Slide deck. I showed you some slides at the beginning, or a slide at the beginning, that I thought was a bad idea, though it was very like the first slide I made, which I fortunately didn't show to anyone. And, I would say essentially you need a master slide deck, and there are two types of slides. So you need some inspirational slides that show your vision. You should be very graphical, very persuasive. You want to stay big picture. Remember, the people you're talking to are VPs, directors. They're not writers. They don't care about the details. They want to get that business case, the sense of how this relates to corporate goals, how it will save them money, how it might increase revenue. Show them this is our vision for what content quality can be. Here are the gaps. This is where we are right now compared to the vision. You need a single slide, which you might call an option matrix, where you look at the main contenders. My contenders were status quo, extra managerial intervention, and getting content quality software, because those were basically the three things. I could have included, what if we get some major documentation management software like Documentum or something, but that wasn't really even in the cards, so I didn't even bother evaluating that as a proposal. I just said, here are the three things we might reasonably do. Here are the costs. Here's the cost avoidance potential. Here's the increased revenue potential. Here are the risks. So that the people who I was asking to fund me could look at this and get at one glance a sense of the project and what was being proposed and what it would get them. I also did, at this point, vendor comparison. So I created a requirements matrix, a weighted requirements matrix, and I evaluated our three contenders and weighted them. And I showed here are the potential content quality software vendors, and here's how they rated on a requirements matrix that I created along with the input of quality and regulatory and other groups. Acrolinks blew the other contenders away, which was predictable and very nice. So then you have your quantitative slides. You need to show total cost of ownership over 3 years, and I'll go into a little more detail about that later. You need to show CapEx, OpEx, ROI, time to break even. And I'll explain all of these in a little more detail in a moment. These are the slides that the cross-functional committee will look at, that finance will look at. What you're aiming for in all of these is at a glance, comprehension. Do not lead with the data. We all love data because that's why we get into our jobs. You should have all your data available if anyone asks detailed questions. Do not lead with it. Just show the conclusions and then be ready to provide details if they ask more questions. So once you have your master slide deck, then depending on your presentation, you can show the appropriate slides. So after all that, my revised pitch was something like this. I decided I was going to focus on two benefits to the company that related to current corporate goals. I said, we're moving into a regulated market. Acrolinks can reduce our risk. We are spending a lot on localization. Acrolinks can save money. By the way, all of the numbers, all of the financial numbers in here are completely fictitious and greatly exaggerated, ridiculously exaggerated. They're just numbers to give you an idea of the sorts of things I was saying. Okay? But this kind of thing where you say, I could save you almost $1.5 million, that definitely gets people's attention. So I didn't speak at all about things like improving quality, about saving editing time, about speeding up onboarding, even about one voice, because that wasn't a key concern of the people who were going to fund me. I only talked about these two things. You need two slides, two quantitative slides. One of them is this CapEx slide where you show the TCO, total cost of ownership. An interesting thing about enterprise application software is that it is generally paid for differently than things like FrameMaker. Usually, there are exceptions. So a capital expenditure is usually defined as something like it has a life cycle of 3 or more years and it costs more than X thousand dollars. The interesting thing about it is that although the vendor might get paid up front, all in one chunk, it is recognized differently in your revenue. So in fact, I didn't need to go up to anyone and say, please give me $1.8 million to fund this software. What I said is this has a 36-month life cycle, and so what that means is that all I need is $50,000 a month. That made it very different because people said, oh yeah, that's pocket change. In our budgets, we can just slide that in very easily. And then of course you have the operational expenses. So there's the initial capital expense, which is generally all of the costs associated with implementation. So this was Acrolinks services for implementation, content rules, the costs that they had for supporting us, the licenses, the software itself. Then that's all the CapEx. But then once you have it, they're depreciating the cost of the software, the cost of the capital expenditure over 3 years. But then there's generally a maintenance cost, which industry standard is usually about 20%. So you've got that. Then you have to plan ahead and say, well, we might do some additional rule sets. We might do some more rule customization in subsequent years. So I'm going to add a little bit and say we should probably plan on some extra expenditure in future years. So here's my total operating expense, total OPEX for the software. And here's how it breaks out per month. 50K of CapEx, 18K of maintenance. And that's very different from just saying, give me 2.7 million. Basically, money is the language of business. When you're talking to people who have the power to give it to you, you really need to show that you can speak this language. This is where I benefited from talking to finance, because they just showed me a slide that looked like this that someone else had done and said, you need a slide like this. They also said you need a slide like this. So here you see I wasn't even talking about the potential costs that could be associated with regulatory violations. All I talked about here was how much money could we potentially save on localization. So again, all financial numbers are fictitious. But suppose we had a $9 million localization budget. Acrolinks is estimated to save 15 to 25% in localization costs by cutting word count, by increasing reuse, and so on. What that means is that it could save $1.3 to $2.25 million in the first year. And you remember in the previous slide, the operational expense the entire operational expense per year is 0.82 million. So what do you know? We're going to break even 7 months after implementation. That's really good. People will love to see that. Those are hard numbers, and they're extremely convincing. So once I showed them these numbers, it was really pretty smooth sailing from then on out. So now you've got all of the proposals set up. You've presented to your cross-functional committee. You've got an approval to move ahead with this project. So now you need to consider who's actually going to do the implementation, and how can you ensure that it's successful? Because you remember that there were 5 stages: concept, feasibility, development, pilot, and sustaining, I think they are. And so you just completed the first one, maybe the second. Your linguistic team and your IT team need to carry this through to success. So how do you make sure that all of these grand promises that you made are actually going to pan out? First thing I would say for a team like this is use your A players. You need people who really deeply understand your style guides. These are the people whose writing is always impeccable, the people that are pointed to as models for all the other writers, the people who are incredibly conscientious and detailed and never miss a deadline. These are the people that you want to be running an Accel implementation. Just setting up the team with your A players and not with the new intern who just showed up and has some time to spare does a great deal to move you towards success. Your goals have to be very measurable. So this team does need to be aware of things like, we want to increase the efficiency and speed of onboarding. We want to reduce error rates. They'll care about those sorts of metrics in a way that your funders did not. But they also need to know, if you promise those localization savings, they need to be able to demonstrate that they met those goals. Having a very clear go-live date is very important. So making sure that they know what they are trying to do in what time frame is critical. Very early in the process, you want to have the work breakdown structure, which is the schedule, the key milestones. You want that worked out and very clear. What we did was we got together our IT team, finance team, Acrolink's content rules, and the linguistic team in one room, and we went through the outline of here's what we need to do. So Acrolink's provided us this initial schedule and breakdown, and we went through and all of the teams estimated the resource hours that would be required from them at each stage. And then what I did was I went to all of the managers of these people who would be involved, and I made sure that that project was on their goals, because this is not the kind of work that can be done in someone's spare time. It's a pretty significant investment of time up front. And so you need to make sure that the people's managers are very on board with them spending that time. That said, when we went into the work breakdown structure, I did not get into how people were going to do the work, because you want your team to own that. You want them to be the ones who do all the innovation, who figure out how to do this in the best way. You don't want to tell them how to do it. They need to own it. If you've done this, then you will have empowered a strong cross-functional team, and you've set them up for success. I'm now going to hand the presentation over to Cinnamon Tillotson, who is one of the 3 people on our linguistic team, to tell you about how we went from there. Thank you. Oh, sorry, pardon me. I forgot the review. So, sorry about that. To successfully pitch enterprise software, first thing to do is think like an executive. You need to speak their language. Figure out who's going to pay for this. Make sure that you have powerful stakeholders who are backing you. Talk to IT and finance to figure out how other groups in the company have done this sort of proposal before. Talk money, talk it well, get finance advice on how to do this, and then empower your cross-functional team to carry on the project. Good luck to all of you. And now I will hand it over to Cinnamon. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathleen. After Kathleen was successful in getting Accel approved, it was time for the linguistic team to take action. We are a team of 3 who are responsible for defining rules, both grammatical rules and style rules, and setting up the preferred use of terms while identifying candidates for reuse. Linguistic team members needed to be familiar with our audience. Not only do we produce customer-facing content, but other teams develop content for our distributors, our investors, and our internal employees. Plus, our audience is global. Many of our documents are translated, and for those that aren't translated, our readers are not all native English speakers. Members of the linguistic team needed experience in writing for these audiences and the ability to reach out to others in our company who develop that type of document and knowledge of their audiences as well. We wanted to help all writers using Accel communicate with one voice, which is the voice of the company. We are a team of 3. So when you set up your team, consider members who are not only have good writing and editing skills, but also have a strong knowledge of the corporate brand. We also worked closely with our IT group. While the linguistic team focused on tasks like defining rules and terminology, our IT team helped us with technical tasks like setting up user accounts, working with Accel to update our language servers, and coordinating updates with our internal testing schedule. At the beginning of the project, we determined what criteria we needed to be successful with Accel. First off, we knew we had to make decisions based on what was best for the company as a whole. We focused on changes that helped the most people rather than focusing on things that would only serve 1 or 2 groups within the company. We also recognized that not all writers produce the same type of content or work within the same types of requirements. To fill this need, we established different rule sets within Accel to address those requirements. The whole time that we were making these decisions, we kept our brand and our style, our corporate branding in mind. We decided to make decisions that were obvious within the linguistics team to keep the project moving. However, we needed to reach out to all the other groups that were writing within the company to make sure that we met their needs as well, while still keeping our brand and style in mind. Help us, content rules. We kicked off the project in late March, and with a very aggressive timeline, we only had 3 months to make all of this happen. Our implementation partner was Content Rules. They have a lot of experience configuring Accel and Accel deployment, and they really helped us meet our aggressive timelines. The most important thing that Content Rules did for us was to make us aware of potential issues during development and help us bypass those issues. We were inexperienced Accel users. We really appreciated the help, but also we didn't even know what problems we were going to have, and Content Rules helped us identify those from the beginning. Really helped us keep the project moving. At the beginning of the project, we gave, I guess it was several gigabytes of content for term harvesting. That resulted in a 5,000-line spreadsheet. Well, that was after Content Rules had gone through, organized the results, removed duplicates, and kind of spelled it out for us. And we were a little overwhelmed with that 5,000-line spreadsheet, but once we got started on it, it went pretty fast. And I would say it went pretty fast with the help of Content Rules. From there, we started defining the rule sets. So when we're defining the rules for Accel, we we're looking at grammatical and style rules, but not all documents use the same types of rules. For example, in technical and instructional, we want to avoid future tense, whereas in marketing literature, future tense is appropriate. So we defined different rule sets for those audiences and then set the rules up appropriate for those rule sets. Then we began some end-user training and troubleshooting. The next phase that we entered was testing. We had our terminology set up, our rules defined for each rule set, and only at that time we had 3 rule sets, I believe. We had one for web writing, one for marketing literature, and one for technical instructional. We started with 18 testers using the software at the beginning of the testing phase, which ended up with 27 testers at the end of the testing phase. We needed to make sure that the feedback that we were getting from our testers was all recorded in one place. And for that, we used some spreadsheets. We used to share these spreadsheets, we used Box. That became a very a localized place for us, a central repository. The linguistic team reviewed the issues submitted by our testers and escalated issues to Accel and content rules. We held regular status meetings with both Accel and content rules to keep us on track and to address the issues that we couldn't solve on our own. It was a great relationship. So metrics were also an important part of this project. We selected a few representative documents and ran them through Accel after each software build was installed. We recorded the before score and the after score for each document to see how each software build was getting closer and closer to where we wanted to be, the results that we were getting from Accel. I'm going to turn it now over to Elizabeth McCroskey, Senior Instructional Designer.
Thanks, Cinnamon. So we launched to our first group of users in July 2013, so that was a little over 3 months after we kicked off in late March. Right now we have 48 active users. Actually, I think we've added a few more than that, but we have a long list of potential users as well, which is great. A lot of people are very excited about Accel. We've seen great results so far. For example, one of our user guides for one of our most popular sequencing instruments, MySeq, we've been able to cut 384 words from that document. So we translate this document into 7 languages. So that's going to help us realize localization savings as we continue to use Accel and cut additional words. We've also seen an average of 30% increase in Accel scores, as high as 48% improvement for some types of documents. And we've just seen increased consistency in the way all of our content developers are writing and using terms now. Our attention to detail in the early phases of the project paid off during rollout. So while we spent a lot of time while configuring the software, we haven't had to spend as much time after it's been rolled out. That, in connection with our collaboration with other groups, really helped to have the software accepted when it was rolled out. We've configured Accel to meet the needs of a broad set of users, but it's still specific enough to guide writers in the use of one company voice. So to help our users, we put together several resources within the company. The first thing we did was to create a SharePoint page where we could store all of our Accel resources, contacts, and links. So that included resources from Illumina as well as resources from Accel, as well as ones we created within Illumina. We added this page to our Writers Network page, which is on our company intranet, and all of the content developers within Illumina can access this page and find the information they need. We also created an Accel user guide to help our users get started locating the plugins on our network, choosing appropriate settings for the type of content they were creating, and get started checking their documents. We've also have an online training module in development, so we're going to roll that out to new users so they can get started a little bit quicker. We also started to reach out to what we call our secondary group of users. So those are users who produce content, but it's not 100% of their job. We wanted to get people excited, so we created a promotional teaser video. And this video provides an overview of Acrolinks and the benefits it provides to our company and to the writers. We also organized a lunch and learn for the secondary users. So during the lunch, we played a game to illustrate common terminology mistakes. We provided a quick demo of how to use the tool, and we provided licensing information to everyone. So the result of that lunch, we have a lot of interest from other groups who want to get started as Acrolinks users, and everyone's very interested in becoming an Acrolinks user to check their own content now. Just a few things we might change if we could do it again. First, we didn't put our SharePoint page up until after we went live. We would have put that up earlier to help our early users, our testers. And also with testing, we think it would have been a little better in the early stages to restrict our testing group to fewer members. We felt we had a few too many. It was great to have a lot of input, but it was difficult to manage our testing feedback with so many testers, especially when we were in the midst of configuring rule sets. So we would say maybe keep your testing group small at the beginning and then gradually grow it as your rule sets become a little more defined. And finally, we would have entered all our product names and the terminology before rollout. We went live with some product names and terminology, those that were found during the initial term harvest, but it would have been better to have most, if not all, product names in our terminology. We have a lot of products here to write about and have very specific ways to represent product names. So this is a big concern for our content developers, and so now we're working to get all our product names and terminology, and we think that'll really improve the results everyone's getting. Okay, I'm going to pass it back to you, Robin.
All right, thanks. Great job, ladies. At this time, I'd like to turn it over to Val Swisher, who, as I mentioned, is the CEO of Content Rules, because it's important for you guys to hear why Illumina is the model student and what they did right. And few people know better than Val and Greg about the right way to implement Acrolinks. So go ahead, Val.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Robin, and thank you, everyone at Illumina. You know, Illumina really needs to get the credit for how well this project went. We have never worked with a customer who was so organized, had thought everything through, everything down to not just the people, but what the people needed to bring to the table, what knowledge they needed to have, how much time they were going to need to devote to the project, at what points of the project were they going to need to give this time. The amount of preparation for this project really showed in just how well the implementation went. This was by far one of the smoothest implementations that we have ever worked on, with a team that was dedicated and really understood that enterprise software that's going to change some basic functions of the writing and editing departments, the people who are doing this work. This is serious stuff. This isn't just an app you download from the web and you launch and it runs on your laptop or whatever. This is enterprise software. It is dealing with the heart and soul of the content of the company. And content is a strategic asset. And Illumina definitely understands this and has treated the development of their content as a true strategic asset. So the amount of preparation that they did, they really had us thinking before this deployment. Okay, who do we need? exactly when do we need them, for exactly how many hours. Certainly, they did a fabulous job in term validation. Term validation is not simple, particularly when you're dealing with thousands and thousands of terms. We were very excited. I think the whole fact that they realized before the purchase that they really did need a service partner to help them was part and parcel of the success of this deployment. Certainly, we're happy to come in after the deployment and help customers with their already deployed software, but to do it right from the beginning really is satisfying, and this deployment went right on time. 3 months, start to finish, everything was right in line, and they were and continue to be a fabulous, fabulous customer to work with, and of course, working hand in hand with the folks at Acrolinks, both in the U.S. and in Berlin. It was like a well-choreographed dance. So really, a lot of credit to the Illumina team, and we're really glad that we got to participate in this and look forward to a future relationship.
Great. Thanks, Val. So at this time, we're going to transition to the question and answer session, and it looks like we have a couple questions here already. And while you guys are making that transition, maybe I'll just read a couple of them aloud. So we have Michael here who's asking, he's saying, how useful is Acrolinks to the company? And I know that you touched on that a little bit, Elizabeth, but I don't know if you guys want to expand on that.
Mm-hmm. Well, it depends on exactly how we're asking this. For example, we've seen that with professional writers, by the way, this is Kathleen, we've seen that with professional writers, we've improved scores by 30% overall. For non-professional writers, i.e. people for whom writing is not 100% of their job, we've seen 48% improvement. People are generally pretty attentive to quality. They're aware that they're not great writers and they really want help, but they haven't got time to run everything through an editor. So our executives, in fact, have really been enthusiastic about Acrolinks because it provides editorial assistance at the click of a button. So when they're finishing up a presentation late at night, they can just click Acrolinks and get some assurance that even though they didn't have time to do everything they wanted to do, they can be sure that it has a level of quality. Our manufacturing writers are enthusiastic because they're often contract writers. And so they were very interested in having Acrolinks available to them to help bring the contract writers on board and up to speed quicker. We are tracking our localization savings, and so far they are in line with what we hoped for. The MySeq, in a way, was a bad example because it's been heavily edited, and so the fact that we were able to cut almost 400 more words from it was very impressive. We've been able to cut thousands more words from other documents that are newer or have not been edited as much. So yeah, right now we are definitely still tracking our metrics, but our results to date are what we hoped for.
Okay, great. Thanks, Kathleen. There's a question here about how did you arrive at the percentage of improvement with Acrolinks? Did you embed the Acrolinks score or, okay, go ahead.
Acrolinks has reporting. One of the distinguishing competitive features of Acrolinks against the other vendors in this space was that the centralized reporting is automatic. So everything that people do is automatically stored in the central database. So all we needed to do to get these to figure out the improvements is just go run a report. You can customize the reports so that different managers have permission to see different numbers of users. So perhaps you only want the manufacturing writing manager to see manufacturing writing data. And so that was really very easy.
Okay, great. Who were the users of Acrolinks? Tech writers, marketing, customer service, etc.
We started off with our marketing literature writers, the product documentation writers, and the writers of commercial training. We've rolled out since then to the quality group, regulatory. Our regulatory group. We've also rolled out to our tech support. Our tech support group writes a lot of customer-facing emails. They also do webinars. So this has been very helpful to them.
Okay, good.
Our next phase, I forgot to tell you that our next phase is, we're really excited about that. We're rolling it out to our software developers. So all the content on our software interfaces will also have Acqualinks approved content.
Okay, great.
The people writing software requirements are also interested because so many different people write product requirements, recs, and specs, and there was awareness that we needed to have those be more standardized. And then our M&A people, our new mergers and acquired companies, have been very enthusiastic about getting Acqualinks.
Okay. We have a question here. What % of quality do you consider a success?
I would say that what I'm looking for at this point is improvement more than an absolute score. So perhaps in the future, I'll have a particular threshold. So for example, I talked with several other companies who had implemented Acqualinks, and some of them had said, some of them had worked with their dot control groups so that dot control would not accept for release any document that didn't have at least, say, an 80% or 90%. But the thing about Acqualinks is you're not aiming for 100%. For example, a document that has, say, a lot of personal names, that'll generate a lot of false flags that you just have to ignore. And they're not mistakes, it's just that they're words that couldn't possibly be in your dictionary. And so while it's obvious to say, no, we don't want our average to be 20%, to say we want everything has to be 100% or everything has to be 95% isn't really the point. So what we were looking for was that improvement. So I'd say generally if I see something above 85%, I'm pleased. If I see that as an average, I think that's good.
Okay. Have you all involved your localization vendor in the implementation of Acqualinks?
We certainly talked to our localization vendors and got their input about this, but they're more the beneficiaries of it. So we are exporting terms now from Acqualinks to provide to our localization vendors for glossary, for localization glossaries. That helps them, but they're not as directly involved in the tool as the authors are.
Okay, great. Kathleen, at the beginning of your presentation, you touched on this briefly, but what led you to implement Acqualinks in the first place?
Awareness of how decentralized our writing effort was getting. As our company gets bigger, writing is no longer something that just tech writers own. All of a sudden it's tech writers, marketing writers, M&As, it's the executives, tech support, manufacturing writers. The numbers just grow and grow and grow, and you realize that a lot of stuff is being released under the Illumina name, and only some of those people are professional writers, and you realize that it becomes impossible at some point to have a single style guide. I think we had 12 at the point that we started this for different parts of the company, and we were lucky that because we have our writers network that they were as aligned as they were, but it just wasn't feasible given people's time to have a unified style. And then also when we use a lot of agencies and contract writers for different things, and you can't just funk a 40-page style guide down to a contractor and expect them to implement it correctly word for word with no editing. It just isn't realistic. And so having an automated tool was really the only way that we could control our quality.
Okay. And it looks like we have one last question here. Do you use Acqualinks as a performance reporting tool on individuals? And do you consider this a good practice, if so?
That's interesting. At a recent Acqualinks conference, this was a heavy topic of discussion because my feeling is, yes, of course it's an element, but other people strongly disagreed. For example, one of Acrolinx's main users found that at their company, if they had given people the impression that Acrolinx was going to be part of their performance evaluation, it would have seriously impaired acceptance by the end users because they would have been too intimidated to want to use it. Over here, people just have a different attitude towards it, and I think also they trust that it will be an element. It's not going to be a deciding element. What I'm looking for, again, is improvement. And so I know that some writers just naturally are very attentive to quality, and I know their scores are going to be way up there anyway. Other people perhaps are fabulous project managers and have other strengths that pertain to writing, but they might not be as diligent about all of the terminology issues. And so with them, I might focus more on, are you improving? It's just something that is a consideration. It's one of the many things that I would look at in a performance evaluation. But I certainly wouldn't go to the writers and say, unless you get 90% on or more on every document you do, you will not get a satisfactory rating. I think that would be a pretty significant demoralizer.
Right.
What we do in the tech writing group is we look at the Acrolinx metrics for trends. For example, one of our goals is to make sure that all of the product documentation looks like it's written by the same writer. So when we look at it, not so much as which writer is reporting this, but we're looking at what types of rules are being flagged, what is the level of reuse within documents, and then we look for those trends and then work together as a group to improve those trends in the right direction.
It's really facilitated group discussions because now the writers have a way of seeing, oh well, you know, our terminology use is pretty much 100%, but our style is surprisingly variable. So as a group, we need to focus on this. That kind of thing. It just gives them a more informed base to talk about what they need to do.
Okay, we have time for a couple more questions here. So do you limit the number of terminology sets that you managed?
Yes. Right now we have one terminology set. For terminology, it's just the Illumina terminology, and it's global. We also have, within that terminology, variations for our UK companies who are subsidiaries of Illumina. And for that, we'll have it set up with a British spelling for some words. Just recently, we found that some of the internal writing that for legal needs to use some of our internal project names that would never go outside of the company. So we don't want that as part of the standard Illumina terminology. So we are considering adding a secondary terminology set. The great thing about Acrolinx is we can identify the users who have access to that terminology, so those internal-only terms never end up as approved for customer-facing content.
Okay. Has it improved documentation so that there is a reduction in the need for customer service?
We are certainly tracking that and looking at it. I haven't got quantitative data yet that demonstrate a clear causal relationship between improved documentation and reduced support calls, but that is something I would very much like to get, and I'm working with the head of technical support to see if we can track it.
Okay. What would you estimate?
Anecdotally,
go ahead.
Sorry, anecdotally from the field, we've heard that the simpler, more concise documentation we're giving them is a big hit.
Great. What would you estimate is the weekly, monthly time commitment spent now by the linguistic team now that you have implemented?
Now that we've implemented, it's very small, actually.
Yeah. There's definitely more hours spent during the configuration and testing phase. I'm not sure of the hours off the top of my head, but I think it was like maybe 20% of our time, something like that.
I think over a quarter, the linguistic team each of them spent between 100 and 200 hours working on this project. So it was a pretty significant chunk of time for 1 quarter, or a little bit more than that.
And now since rollout, what we do is, part of Acrolinks is there's a feature called Term Contributor. When a new term is identified as maybe a misspelled term or an unknown term by Acrolinks, but the writer knows that it is maybe a new term associated with an Illumina product, they can go to the Term Contributor and enter it. And it's the linguistics team responsibility to evaluate that term and mark it as preferred or not accepted. That I thought was going to be a time-consuming effort after launch, but it's not at all. We put probably about 30 minutes a week into it, and we can go through the terms pretty quickly, do it on Friday mornings. Mm-hmm. The other part is being available for questions and answers as we roll out to new users. Once users get their user accounts and they log in, they can use the Acrolinks resources page that we have set up on our intranet for immediate information, but every now and then we'll meet for 30 minutes just to do a one-on-one training for any issues that they might be having. So far I would say it's maybe 3% of our time.
Okay, great. And then we have time for one more question here. Someone's asking, do you use DITA XML for structured writing?
We do not. We are looking at moving that way, but we determined that our writing at this point in time doesn't need DITA, but our tech writing manager has implemented DITA systems before at other companies, and we think that probably in the next year or two we'll move that way.
Okay, great. Well, we're at the top of the hour, so many thanks to Kathleen, Elizabeth, Cinnamon, and Val for your presentations today. And then many thanks to you, everyone out in the audience. We hope this was of value to you. As I mentioned earlier, this session was recorded, so I am going to send out an email with a link to the recording, and hopefully I'll get that out tomorrow, if not tomorrow, early next week. And then if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to any one of us. We'd be happy to get your questions answered. So thanks again, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day.